The road into Thornvale settlement stretched out long and pale under a half-moon, and Silas Ashward, 31, wound-mender, ex-border infantry, human, rode the last miles of it alone on a horse that was too tired to complain, and a body that had forgotten what rest felt like somewhere around the 6th month of a 10-month campaign. He carried a field satchel across the saddle horn, a rolled bedroll strapped behind him, and the particular unfinished grief of a man who had lost his mother to sickness in a healing hold 4 provinces away, while he was elbow-deep in somebody else's wounds on a border that never stopped bleeding. The hold was supposed to be empty. Nobody had lived there in 4 months, not since the night Silas Ashward, the woman who had raised him alone in a settlement of under 2,000 souls, died in a cot surrounded by healer monks who knew her name, and a son who did not make it back in time to say his. The message had reached him 11 days after she was already in the ground. 11 days. He had done the math so many times, it had worn a groove in him, a trench he fell into, every time the ride went quiet enough for thinking. He swung down from the saddle at the front gate and stood there a moment, letting the hold take shape in front of him. Small, stone-walled. The hearth-fire lantern beside the front door, the one his mother had never once let go dark, was out. Nobody had fed the fire in 4 months, because nobody was supposed to be here to need it. Silas pulled the old iron key from his coat, the same key he had carried since he was 12, its teeth worn smooth from 2 campaigns, and let himself in. The hallway was black, cold in the way only a stone house that has had its heart put out can be cold. Not winter cold, but absence cold, the kind that starts in the walls and works inward. So when Silas saw light bleeding out from under the kitchen door at the far end of the hall, small and amber and moving the way a flame moves instead of holding steady the way a lantern does, every year of training his body had ever absorbed, did the same thing at once. It went quiet, it went careful, it went still in a way that had nothing to do with peace, and everything to do with the particular, practiced readiness of a man who had spent 10 months entering rooms that might not be safe, and learned to let his heartbeat answer to discipline instead of fear. He stood in the front hallway and listened, a drawer sliding shut, a soft thump, something flat and heavy being set down on wood, the unmistakable small sound of a blade moving through the skin of a fruit. Somebody was in his dead mother's kitchen at the deep end of night, in a hold that had been dark and locked since the funeral he never made it home for. Silas moved the way the boarder had taught him. Weight on the outside of his boots, shoulder against stone, silhouette narrow. His hand did not reach for a weapon because something about those sounds, their domesticity, their smallness, told him whatever was in that kitchen was not raiding the hold. It was living in it. He pushed the kitchen door open. The woman on the other side came up out of her chair so fast, the candle in front of her nearly guttered out, one hand already closing around a skinning blade on the cutting board, with the particular, rehearsed speed of someone who had practiced that motion in her sleep and hoped she would never have to use it awake. She was tall, taller than he expected, and her skin carried the gray-green undertone of orc blood, the kind of coloring that caught candlelight and turned it into something sharper than it had any right to be. Her hair was pulled back in a quick, graceless braid, a few dark strands shaken loose around her temples, the kind of knot somebody ties when they do not have the time or the safety to care how it looks. For exactly 1 second, they just looked at each other, 2 people who had both spent recent months learning how to come out of stillness, fast recognizing that training in each other, the way 2 animals of the same species recognize a shared instinct before they recognize anything else. Don't move. It came out flatter than he meant it to. 10 months of saying things like that for a living, over wounded men, over surgical tables, over soldiers who needed a voice that sounded like it had already decided what was going to happen next, had done something permanent to his voice, taken the softness out of the machinery of it. She did not put the blade down. Her knuckles were bone white around the handle, but her eyes were not on his hands or his face. They were on the door behind him, counting the steps to it. "I'm not going to hurt you," slower this time. The voice he used on patients who had already decided the world was dangerous. "This is my hold. I need you to tell me who you are and why you're in it." Something in her shoulders released a fraction at the words. My hold. Not all the way, not even close, but the particular kind of release that said those two words meant something specific to her, something beyond a stranger's claim in the dark. She set the blade down, not dropped it, set it down, deliberate and controlled, the way you lower a weapon once you have decided that the room in front of you is not the threat you were waiting for after all. The candlelight caught her face when she finally turned all the way toward him, and two things registered at once. The first was the set of her jaw, the way she held her chin a fraction too high, angled slightly away from the light on her left side, like she was bracing for a blow that was not coming and hiding something on the side she would not show him. The second was a snag of recognition somewhere behind his sternum, a memory he could not place yet. Something about the architecture of her face that belonged to a room in this house he had not entered in over a decade. Silas. Not a question. His name arriving in a voice he did not recognize, attached to a face he almost did, and the dissonance of it, the knowing and the not knowing happening in the same breath, locked him in place. He did not answer. He was running through 13 years of faces, barrack mates, settlement kids, border patients, trying to find the one that matched, coming up empty and hating it because whoever she was not a stranger to him. She saw the not knowing on his face, and something in her expression cracked. The particular quiet devastation of a person who had rehearsed this moment and accounted for every outcome except the one where she was simply not remembered. "Don't you recognize me?" Silas set his satchel down slow against the wall. "No sudden moves, the way you lower your hands for somebody who has already decided the world is built for ambush and needs to see your palms before they can hear your words." "I don't." He started and stopped, because finishing that sentence felt like admitting something enormous in front of a woman he had just found holding a skinning blade in his dead mother's kitchen, with a half-peeled root apple going brown on the table beside her. "I'm sorry, I don't." "Nara," she said it, the way you hand somebody a key you are not sure they will know how to use, carefully, with the weight of the thing showing in how she held the word, before she let it go. "Nara Gravestusk. Your mother used to call me Wren." The name landed behind his sternum before his brain caught up. Wren. Nobody had said that word in this house in over a decade, and hearing it now did something to the air. Thinned it, the way a held breath changes the pressure inside a chest that was not ready. And then the memory surfaced, not all at once, but in pieces, the way a shape emerges from dark water when you stop looking directly at it. 13 years is a strange unit of time. It is long enough to forget the exact sound of somebody's laugh, the precise geography of their face, at 16. It is not long enough to forget the year his mother turned the spare room at the end of the hall into a place for a scared orc girl to sleep. No questions asked, no council paperwork completed, no explanations demanded. Because the settlement's ward house had no room for another displaced youngling on a stormy night. And Silas Ashward had never once in her life turned away a person who needed a door to knock on. Nara had come from a border clan that no longer existed, scattered by the same wars Silas would later fight on the other side of. The settlement's ward houses had bounced her through 3 placements in 2 months before Marin heard about it from Hesta and walked to the council hall and said simply, "I have a room. Send her to me." Nara stayed 9 months. 9 months in which an 18-year-old boy who had already signed his enlistment papers learned that family does not always arrive through blood or ceremony. Sometimes it just shows up on a bad night, stays long enough to leave a shape in the house that never fills back in, and then gets moved 3 settlements over because paperwork said so, and neither of them managed a real goodbye. You grew up. It was a stupid thing to say, and he knew it the second it left his mouth. The kind of thing people say when the distance between who somebody was and who they are now is too large to cross with language that actually means something. Something that might have been the ghost of a laugh moved across her face and vanished before it arrived. So did you. And that was when Silas noticed it, in the candlelight, when she almost smiled, the particular detail that turned everything about this moment from strange to something far worse. Her tusks were filed. Both of them, the lower canines that every orc carried as a birthmark of blood and clan and self, ground down to blunt, smooth stubs that sat flush against her lower lip instead of curving upward the way they were meant to. In orc culture, tusk filing was not cosmetic. It was erasure. It was something done to an orc to make them palatable for human society. A grinding down, a making smaller, a removal of the part that announced what you were before you ever opened your mouth. And it was almost never voluntary. Silas said nothing about it, but something in his stomach turned over, slow and heavy, because he understood. Before she told him a single detail about the man she had left, or the reason she was sitting alone in a dead woman's kitchen at midnight, that whoever had done that to her tusks had been doing far worse to the parts of her that did not show. How did you know the hold would be empty? The question came out sharper than he intended, and he watched her flinch at the tone, the same total practiced flinch she had given at the sound of the door, a full-body setting, built for absorbing impact. He softened it. I mean, how did you know about the key, the hold, any of it? Nara wrapped both arms around her own elbows, a gesture that looked well-worn, like she had been holding herself together with her own body for long enough that her arms knew the position, without being asked. Your mother told me years ago where she kept the spare key, behind the loose hearthstone beside the back step. A breath, the kind that cost something to take. We lost touch for years after I left. But I found her again 4 years ago and wrote her a letter, mostly because nobody else in the system ever fed me supper without making me feel like a ledger entry somebody was obligated to fill. She wrote back inside a week. We never really stopped after that. /4 years. Silas did the math out loud, and something ugly and unfamiliar moved through his chest. Not quite anger, close enough to anger that he did not trust his own voice for a second. 4 years of letters. 4 years of his mother corresponding with a person he had forgotten, existed, keeping that entire relationship in a drawer he had never thought to open. /4 years, and I didn't know you were back in her life. She didn't keep it from you to hurt you, Nara said, quiet, and the quietness had the particular, careful weight of a sentence she had been preparing to say for a long time. I'm the one who asked her not to tell you. I wasn't ready for you to know I was back. He did not have anything to say to that. The honest truth was that he still did not have anything to say to that. Not then, not now, not in any version of this night that he had run through in the weeks since. So why are you here tonight? He kept his voice level. Hearth fire dead, blade in your hand. My mother, 4 months in the ground. Nara was quiet long enough that the candle burned down another 1/4 inch between them, the wax pooling along the table's edge in a slow amber tide that neither of them moved to stop. Because I didn't have anywhere else that felt safe. She was not looking at him when she said it. She was looking at the door, the same door she had been watching since he walked in, her eyes returning to it the way a compass returns to north, automatic and involuntary. Your mother told me a long time before she died, if it ever got bad enough, come here. She said you'd understand, even if you didn't recognize me right away. She said, you were the kind of man who fixes what's broken instead of asking how it got that way first. Bad enough with who? Her jaw worked once, the muscles tightening and releasing along the filed line of her tusks, like she was deciding how much truth a man she had not seen in 13 years was entitled to receive on the first night. His name is Aldrich, she said finally. Aldrich Vane. His family owns half the trade roads in 3 provinces. I was supposed to marry him in the spring. A pause that held more weight than anything she had said so far. I left 9 days ago, and I don't think he's stopped looking for me since. Silas thought about 10 months of field triage, about learning to read a person's entire condition in the first 4 seconds of looking at them. Pulse, color, breathing rate, what they were protecting versus what they had already given up on protecting. He looked at Nara standing in his dead mother's kitchen at midnight, with a half-peeled root apple browning on the table, and he read her the exact same way he would have read a casualty on the border. She was protecting the door. She had not once in 5 minutes stopped tracking it. Okay. Nara blinked, and the blink carried the particular startled weight of a person who had braced themselves for interrogation and received a single syllable instead. Okay, you can stay tonight. We'll figure out the rest of it when the sun comes up. He nodded toward the satchel against the wall, instead of moving any closer to her, because proximity was a thing you earned from somebody who flinched at doors, not a thing you took. I'm not going to make you explain the whole thing standing up in the dark. Something in her face did not relax exactly, but it stopped bracing. Just for a second, just long enough for him to see the person underneath the posture, the woman behind the readiness, and for that first night in a dead woman's kitchen, lit by a single candle that was burning down to nothing. That was enough for both of them. He gave her the larger bedroom, his mother's, and took the spare room at the end of the hall instead. The same room Nara had slept in 13 years ago. The irony of it was not lost on him. Silas lay in the dark on a mattress that smelled like dust and cedar and absence, listening to the hold settle around him the way old stone does when it remembers there are people inside it again. He did not sleep. Not really. A soldier's version of sleep. One ear always open, one hand always knowing where the nearest exit was, the body resting in shifts while the mind stood watch. Somewhere past the deepest hour, he heard her get up. Not to leave, but to check the door. The lock turning, testing, turning back. Footsteps pausing outside his room, then retreating. She was auditing escape routes before she could let herself close her eyes. Silas lay in the dark thinking about a mother who had known somehow that this hold would be needed again, that the door she opened 13 years ago was the first installment of something she was trusting her son to finish. If this story already has its hands on you, if you felt the weight of a filed tusk in candlelight, or a name landing in a room that wasn't ready for it, Part 2 is where the house starts to wake up, and the past Nara is running from gets close enough to leave tracks on the road outside. If you want to know what Silas finds in his mother's cedar chest and why it changes everything, come back for Part 2. Subscribe to the Orcish Saga. The hearth fires just getting started. Morning made the hold look like exactly what it was. Small, cold, and clearly abandoned by everyone except the two of them. Sunlight did what candlelight had been kind enough not to do the night before. It showed every crack, every absence, every surface that had gone too long without a living hand to tend it. Dust on the mantel where his mother's herb jars used to sit in a row. A water stain on the ceiling above the hallway where a roof patch had given up sometime during the months nobody was here to notice. The hold was grieving too, in its own slow, structural way, and the daylight made no effort to be gentle about it. Silas found the evidence of Nara's survival in pieces. Candle stubs on the windowsill, burned to different heights like a calendar made of wax. A wool blanket folded tight in the hall closet, positioned so a person lying in it could see the front door without lifting their head. Behind the cold belly of the water heater, a canvas sack of dried meat and hard bread angled toward the back entrance, staged for a departure in under 60 breaths. 10 months of border campaign teaches you what somebody's survival footprint looks like when they have been living ready to run. Nara's whole presence in that hold was built for a fast exit, the particular devastating practicality of a woman who had stopped trusting walls and only trusted doorways that opened outward. Silas rebuilt the hearth fire before he did anything else. He knelt and stacked the kindling, the way his mother had taught him. Cedar shavings first, thin splits, quarter logs, each one placed with the care of someone performing a small resurrection. When he pulled the hearthstone loose to check the draft channel, his hand stopped. The stone was warm, not hot, nothing with a mechanical explanation, just warm, the particular, impossible warmth of a stone that should have been cold for 4 months, and was not. Old Thornvale belief held that a mother's hearthstone does not go fully cold as long as somebody she loved still needs the warmth. Silas put the stone back and did not mention it to anyone. The fire caught. The hold groaned, expanding stone and warming iron, and for the first time in 4 months, warm air moved through the rooms. Nara stood in the kitchen doorway, watching it spread across the flagstones, bare feet at the edge of the warmth's reach, her face carrying the particular unguarded expression of a person who had forgotten what this felt like. "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did." He did not explain further because some things do not need explaining to the person they are for. The hold was warm again. That was the sentence, and it did not require a second clause. Old Hesta arrived the next afternoon, carrying a covered dish, wearing an expression that said she had already noticed the chimney smoke and drawn her conclusions. She was past 70, sharp as an arrowhead, and had occupied the stone cottage next door since before Silas was born. She had been the one to find Marin collapsed, the one to sit with her at the end when the sun was too far away to reach. "Didn't tell me you had a girl with you," she said on the front step, loud enough that Nara heard it through the open window. She held out rabbit stew, the same recipe she had been making since before Silas could hold a spoon. "She's not." Hesta handed him the dish. Like that settled it. "Your mother would have liked her. She always did." Silas found the letters 4 days later. He had been digging through the cedar chest at the foot of his mother's bed, looking for the deed stone to the hold, the land papers, the settlement records he would need if he was going to keep this place instead of letting it pass back to the council. And his hand found the stack before his eyes did. Paper bound with cord into 4 neat bundles, sorted by year, the way his mother sorted everything. Herbs by season, firewood by density, love by whoever needed it most. 27 letters, 4 years' worth of somebody else's life, written in a hand that started unsteady in the first bundle and grew surer with every one that followed. Nara's name on the return line, his mother's careful annotations in the margins, a date here, a question mark there, once a single word circled twice. Worried. He sat on the floor of a room that still smelled like cedar and dried lavender, and read 4 years of a life he had not known was happening. Nara's first apartment. A beast healer apprenticeship earned by showing up every morning for 4 months before anyone agreed to teach her. A graduation his mother had ridden 6 hours each way to attend without ever mentioning it to Silas. And an engagement announcement, to which his mother had replied with something that read less like congratulations and more like a warning, wearing congratulations as a disguise. "He seems like the kind of man who needs you smaller than you are, Wren. The kind who would file your tusks and call it refinement. Watch for that." Silas followed the trail of a woman his mother had seen more clearly from 6 hours away than anyone standing next to her, managed from across a dinner table. Between the 3rd and 4th bundles wedged into the bottom of the chest, Silas found a small bone carving. A bird, round-bodied, head tilted the way wrens do when listening for something they cannot see yet. One wing was finished, every feather etched with patient detail. The other wing was only roughed in, an outline, a promise. His mother had been carving a wren for Nara. She had not finished it before she died. He set it on the top shelf of the hallway cabinet, where it would wait until he understood who was supposed to receive it and when. He did not hear Nara come into the room. He just felt the air change, the particular, subtle shift that happens when a doorway goes from empty to occupied, and looked up to find her standing in the frame with her arms crossed tight over her chest, her eyes on the stack in his hands, with an expression that said she had been caught losing something she thought was hidden. "I should have told you those existed. Why didn't you?" "Because they were the only thing that was just mine." Her voice did not shake, but it went very quiet, the particular, costly quiet of a person holding something steady through sheer force of will, because letting it waver would mean letting everything else waver too. Everything else got taken, or watched, or explained to somebody eventually. Those letters were the one part of my life nobody else got to read. Silas set the stack down like it had gotten heavier in his hands, while he was not paying attention. "I read them anyway. I know." She almost smiled, a twitch at the corner of her mouth that arrived and left in the same breath, like a bird landing on a wire and deciding against it. "I guess that makes us even for the knife thing." The first sign the outside world had not forgotten about Nara came through Hesta, because in a settlement of under 2,000 people, nothing happens that she does not hear about first. Man came into the tavern asking about an orc girl. Over the fence line, not even trying to lower her voice. Black horse, Vane family sigil on the saddle. showed the barmaid a sketch, said his betrothed had gone missing and he was worried sick. Her mouth went thin. Marta said he didn't look worried. She said he looked like a man checking a ledger. Something in Silas's chest went very still. The same cold stillness he used to feel before a signal horn meant somebody was about to need him fast. Did she tell him anything? Marta knew your mother 30 years. Told him she hadn't seen anybody matching that description. But he left blood silver on the counter. Said if anybody remembered something, there'd be more of it. He found Nara in the half-wild garden, pulling dead vine stems off stakes with a focus that looked less like gardening and more like something she needed her hands to do so her mind would leave her alone. He's here. No good way to soften it, so he did not try. She went still, the same practiced stillness, discipline wearing calm's clothes. Tavern, yesterday, maybe the day before. That's faster than I hoped and slower than I feared, she said, mostly to herself. You need to tell me everything. Not the version you think won't scare me off. All of it. Okay, come inside. This isn't a conversation for a garden. They sat across from each other at the same table where he had found her that first night. Same chairs, same wood, same candlelight replaced now by the watery afternoon sun through a window that needed cleaning. And Nara told him the parts she had left out. She said Aldrich had not started out controlling. He had started out attentive, and it took her over a year to understand that attentive and controlling were sometimes the same behavior, wearing different clothes, and by the time she recognized the fabric, she had already handed him the scissors. He managed which friends she kept by being just critical enough of each one that she drifted away on her own. He handled the blood silver because he was better with ledgers, until the day she needed 12 marks for a cart axle repair and had to ask permission like a child, and the asking itself was the point. She had worked as a beast healer before the engagement, a job she loved, a job that was hers, until he convinced her that the wedding in his family's trading foundation left no room for it. And somewhere in that convincing, her name quietly stopped being attached to anything she could point to and say, "This is mine." The tusks, she said it the way she would say a weather report, flat, factual, drained of everything that might make a listener flinch so that she could get through the sentence without flinching herself. He had arranged for a cosmetic grinder in the city, told her it would help her fit in at foundation events, told her the families he dealt with were traditional, that visible tusks made them uncomfortable, that it was a small accommodation for the life he was offering her. She sat in a chair in a stranger's office and let a man she did not know file down the part of her face that announced what she was before she ever said a word. And she did it because Aldrich had built a world where saying no felt more dangerous than losing a piece of herself. The bruise along her jaw, the one she had been angling away from every light since he first saw her, was 3 weeks old. He had grabbed her hard enough to leave marks the night she told him she wanted to postpone the wedding. Not a fist, she said, like that distinction mattered, like the taxonomy of how a hand damages a face changes anything about the fact that it did. I filed a report the night I left, she said. Got the ward seal, the protection order, the next morning from the provincial magistrate. His family's advocate had it narrowed down to almost nothing inside 48 hours. Turns out, when a man's family controls half the trade routes in 3 provinces, magistrates find a lot of reasons to be reasonable with him. Her hands stayed flat on the table, very still, very controlled, every finger pressed against the wood, like she was holding herself to the surface of the earth by force of will. So, legally, he can't come within 500 paces of me. Legally, I could send for the warden right now and they'd take a report. He's already broken that seal twice since I left, and both times the responding deputy decided it was a misunderstanding, because he is very good at looking like the reasonable one in the room. She lifted her eyes to meet his, and the look in them was not fear. Not exactly. It was something past fear, something on the other side of it. The particular, exhausted clarity of a person who has been afraid long enough that the fear has burned down to a kind of arithmetic. I don't think a wax seal and a piece of parchment is going to be the thing that stops him. I think I am. And I ran out of ideas for how, which is why I'm sitting in a dead woman's kitchen eating dried fish by firelight. instead of anywhere that makes sense. The silence that followed was the kind Silas knew better than to fill. Some silences you close because the discomfort of them is worse than whatever words you use to do it, and some you leave open because closing them would be an insult to whatever is sitting inside them. This was the second kind, the kind that needs to breathe, the kind that a person earns by handing you the heaviest thing they own and trusting you not to set it down too fast. If you're still here, if you felt the weight of filed tusks, or blood silver left on a tavern counter, or a dead woman's warning hidden in the margins of a letter, part 3 is where the dark gets closer. A rider passes the hold at night. Nara tries to disappear before dawn, and Silas says the thing he's been carrying since the moment he found her in that kitchen. Come back for part 3. Subscribe to the Orcish Saga. This fire doesn't go out. Silas called on Warden Calavet the next morning. Calav had attended the same ancestor shrine as Marin for 30 years. He had been the one who rode the signal route himself, trying to get emergency leave through fast enough, and the one who had to send the second message, saying there was no longer a reason for it. He sat at the kitchen table with his hat in his hands and listened to Nara's account without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet, the particular, weighted quiet of a man who knows the stories told in flat voices are usually the worst. "I can't arrest a man for asking questions in a tavern," he said, "but I can make sure every deputy riding patrol knows what his horse looks like and what crest is on that saddle. And I can send word to the magistrate's office in whatever province issued that ward seal and get these violations entered into the formal record. Not just spoken, written. That gives you something with weight behind it if this goes further than a tavern visit." He looked at Nara the way you look at somebody when you want the next sentence to land somewhere it will stay. "And you signal me direct, not the dispatch post, not the deputy on rotation. Me. The second anything about this feels wrong. Doesn't matter, the hour." He left his personal signal mark scratched on the back of one of Marin's old ancestor shrine prayer cards, which felt like exactly the kind of detail she would have appreciated. Her faith and her practicality finding each other on the same scrap of paper, the way they always had when she was alive. Silas walked Calev to the gate. It was not until the warden was on his horse that Silas noticed him pause at the boundary, dismount, and press something small into the earth at the fence post. A dark flat stone, an oath stone. Old settlement custom. A warden places a stone at the boundary of a hold he has taken under his watch. This ground is guarded. What happens here will be answered for. Calev did not announce it, did not look back. He simply rode. Silas stood at the gate a long time, looking at the small dark shape in the dirt, understanding that some promises are better kept when nobody asks for them out loud. 2 nights later, Silas was already awake. He had not slept a full night since he returned from the border. Not really. Just the shallow, watchful rest of a man whose body had learned to treat sleep as a tactical vulnerability rather than a need. When a shadow passed slow across the bedroom ceiling, the particular sweep of a rider moving at the pace of someone who was not traveling but searching, he was at the window before the thought had fully formed. A dark figure on horseback moving along the ridge road at a speed that had no honest reason behind it. The rider slowed almost to a stop in front of the hold, held there 4 or 5 heartbeats, long enough to study the gate, the chimney smoke, the hearth firelight bleeding through the kitchen shutters, and then moved on, unhurried. The particular patient unhurriedness of someone who was not arriving, but measuring. Nara was already in the doorway of his room when he turned from the window. She must have heard him rise, or she had not been sleeping either, which was the more likely truth, and the worse one. Was it him? Too dark to see the crest. He kept his voice level, the voice he used on patients whose condition he did not love the look of, but who needed steady hands more than they needed honesty. But it wasn't nobody. Neither of them spoke for a long moment after that. They just stood in the dark, 2 people listening to the absence of hoofbeats, both of them running the same calculation on how much time they actually had left before that rider stopped riding past and started riding in. They did not talk about the rider again, not directly, but something shifted after that night in how they moved around each other. Less like 2 people occupying the same hold out of necessity and accident, and more like two people who had quietly agreed to stand on the same side of something without ever naming what that something was. She started, leaving a second mug beside his on the kitchen shelf every morning without either of them commenting on it. He started walking the property boundary before bed, not because Caliph had asked him to, but because his body could not stop until the perimeter was clear, the same way it could not stop on the border until every patient in the tent had been checked one final time. And one night, when the cold had gone sharp enough to see breath, Nara came out onto the front step in one of his old campaign cloaks, too large for her, the shoulders hanging past her own, the hem brushing her calves, and walked the boundary with him, saying nothing, just matching his stride, step for step in the dark, the way a person does when the walking matters more than the destination. "You don't have to do this every night," he told her. "Neither do you," she said. "But here we both are." They stood at the edge of the tree line where the wheat field his grandfather had kept years ago had gone to wild grass and thistle, breath fogging between them, and for a long time neither of them said anything else. It was the kind of silence that did not need filling, the kind that feels more like a room than an absence, a space two people choose to stand inside together, because being in it is better than being anywhere else alone. The wrist is where this part of the story bends. Silas had noticed it days before he spoke, the way she favored her left wrist when she carried anything heavier than a cup, rolling it out before she lifted. He watched her do it 6 times because a wound mender learns that the moment you name a wound is as important as the treatment. "Let me look at it. It's fine. I didn't ask if it was fine. I asked to look at it." She held it out the way you surrender something, the particular deliberate release of a person who has decided the cost of holding on has exceeded the cost of letting go. He turned it under the lamplight. An old sprain healed wrong, the kind of injury that happens when somebody grabs a wrist hard enough that letting go does not undo the damage. He did not ask how it happened. The gratitude in her silence was louder than anything she could have said. "It'll ache in cold weather for the rest of your life," he said, wrapping the linen tape with the steady hands of someone who had done this 1,000 times for people whose injuries were louder and whose wars were further away. "But it won't get worse if you're careful with it. I can tape it so it stops waking you up at night." She watched him work, the particular careful attention of a person studying not the act but the manner of it, the way the hands moved without performing, the way the treatment happened without becoming a transaction. "You're good at this," she said. "The fixing without making it a thing part, occupational hazard." He kept his eyes on the tape instead of her face, because looking at her face while she said things like that had started doing something to his chest he did not have a name for yet. A tightness that was not pain, a fullness that was not discomfort. The particular unnamed sensation of a man who is beginning to understand that the person sitting across from him is becoming important in a way that will not fit inside any category he already owns. You get good at treating people like they're more than the worst thing that happened to them. You have to, or you can't do the work. "Is it hard?" she asked. The border, the campaign. He had not talked about Dren to anyone since the debrief. And even then, only in the stripped-down procedural language they train you to use so the story doesn't cost you anything on the way out. Cause of injury, duration of treatment, outcome, filed. But something about the lamplight and the taped wrist and a woman who had just handed him her worst secret made it feel uneven not to hand her one back. "There was a soldier in my unit, Dren, 23 years old." Silas turned the roll of tape over in his hands the way a man handles an object when what he actually needs is something to do with his fingers, so his voice can keep working. Arrow wound to the chest, missed the heart by a finger's width. "I had him stable for 11 minutes, talking, conscious, telling me about a girl he was going to marry when the campaign ended, before the extraction riders got delayed by a washed-out bridge crossing. And then, I didn't have him stable anymore. A breath, the kind of breath that holds a door open to a room you do not want to walk back into, but cannot stop yourself from entering. I've spent every day since telling myself, if I moved faster, if I checked the airway one more time, if I packed the wound a different way, if those 11 minutes had been 12. He stopped, the way you stop at the edge of something when looking down becomes worse than the height itself. I don't like handing things off, ever since. I'd rather carry the whole weight myself than trust somebody else to catch half of it and drop it. Nara did not say anything comforting. She did not tell him it was not his fault, the way people do when they want a conversation to be over, more than they want to actually sit inside it with you. She just reached across the table and put her taped hand over his. Careful of the wrist, aware of the linen, the touch arriving with the particular, deliberate gentleness of a person who understands that some people need to see a hand coming before they can allow it to land. She left it there. "That's going to be a problem," she said finally. "Quiet, because I think you're about to have to trust somebody with half of this." He woke at the edge of dawn 2 mornings later, not to a sound, but to the absence of one. The hold was too quiet, the particular held breath quiet of a space that has just lost a person. He found her in the front hall cloak, already fastened, the strap of a canvas bag over one shoulder, a folded piece of paper sitting on the hall table, addressed to him in the handwriting he now recognized from 27 letters. She was facing the door, one hand on the iron latch, and she had made it that far without a single board creaking. The particular, practiced silence of someone who had learned how to leave rooms without waking the people in them. And the fact that she was good at it told him everything about how many times she had needed to be. "Don't." She froze with her hand on the latch, did not turn around right away, like she needed a second to decide whether to be a person who explained herself or a person who just kept walking. She turned around. "You didn't sign up for this, Silas." Her voice was flat again, the flat that was not emptiness but pressure, the sound a voice makes when the truth underneath it is too large to carry in any other register. "You came home to grieve your mother and figure out what's left of your life, and instead you've got a rider circling your hold at midnight because of me. And your plan is to walk out into the dark alone. Let him find you somewhere with no warden who knows your name and no oath stone at the gate. My plan is to stop being a weight I dropped on the one person who should never have had to carry it." He crossed the hall and stood close enough that she would have to look at him or step back. She did not step back. Her eyes were at the level of his jaw, the particular geometry of 2 people standing closer than strangers stand. Further apart than everything else between them suggested they should be, and she held there, not moving, not retreating the same way she had held the knife that first night. Steady, braced, uncertain only about what came next. "You didn't drop anything on me." His voice came out low, the register it dropped into when something mattered enough to strip everything decorative off of it. "My mother left a door open for you, 13 years before I even knew there was a decision to make. You didn't choose this hold. She did, and I'm the one who gets to decide what I do now that you're in it. I'm choosing not to let you walk out that door alone before the sun is up, because you've decided my life is worth more than yours. That's not what It's exactly what you said, just with better arithmetic." He reached up, slow, telegraphing every inch of the motion, giving her every chance to step back the way he should have given her that first night with the blade. And she did not step back. His hand settled against the strap on her shoulder, not pulling, not demanding, just resting there the way you rest a hand on something when you want it to know it has been noticed. "I spent 10 months learning exactly how much damage a person can survive before they can't anymore. You are nowhere close to done, Nara, and neither am I. I don't want to carry the whole thing alone, and I don't think you do either. That's not weakness. That's just 2 people finally setting a bag down." Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying yet, holding it the same deliberate way she had set that blade down on the first night, a controlled lowering instead of a collapse. "I don't know how to do this," she said, barely above a whisper. "Let somebody stand next to me instead of behind me or in front of me. Then we figure it out together. Starting now." He lifted the bag off her shoulder and set it down against the wall. "Gentle, the way you set down something you are planning to pick back up eventually. Just not tonight. Stay, not because you owe me an explanation, because I'm asking." She stayed. "If you're still here, if you felt linen tape on a broken wrist, or the sound of a latch almost turning at dawn, or the weight of a bag being set down instead of carried through a door. Part 4 is where the knock comes. Aldrich arrives, not sneaking, not circling, standing on the porch like a man who owns whatever room he walks into. And Silas has to decide how far he's willing to go to keep a promise his mother made 13 years ago. Come back for the final part. Aldrich Vane came 2 nights later, and he did not come sneaking, which somehow made it worse. He walked straight up the hold's front steps at 9:15 in the evening, boots landing on each board with the particular unhurried authority of a man arriving for a dinner he believed he had been invited to, and knocked. 3 measured knocks, the knock of someone who expects doors to open for him, because they always have. Silas knew before he reached the latch. Nara's body told him, the way she went rigid at the sound of boots on wood that did not belong to him, or Hesta, or Kalev, a rigidity that was not surprise but recognition, the way a horse knows the sound of a specific rider before it sees the face. He opened the door onto a man in a fine-cut riding cloak that looked like it cost more than everything Silas owned, saddled together. A face built for merchant council chambers, not doorsteps, clean, angular, composed in the way only expensive grooming and the absolute certainty of one's own importance can produce. Up close, Aldrich Vane did not look dangerous, and that Silas understood in the first 4 seconds. The same diagnostic instinct he had used over 1,000 wounded soldiers was exactly how he had gotten away with everything for this long. He looked reasonable. He looked like the kind of man other men believed. He looked like the kind of man magistrates trusted and deputies apologized to, and barmaids second-guessed their instincts about. Aldrich did not waste time on a greeting. "I'm here for my betrothed." The words landed flat and proprietary, as if Silas were a steward standing between him and a piece of furniture he had come to collect. "She's not your betrothed. She's not anything of yours." Silas kept his body in the doorframe, weight balanced, shoulders filling the space, the same stance he would have taken over a bleeding soldier in a contested position, protecting the airway before anything else mattered. "You need to leave this property. This is a misunderstanding. I'd prefer to settle with Josie." "Nara." The correction came with a flicker of irritation, the mask shifting just enough to show the machinery behind it. "Not with whoever you are. I'm the person signaling the warden right now if you take one more step." And then Aldrich did something Silas had been waiting for, the thing men like him always eventually do, because the architecture of their control depends on forward motion, and they do not know how to stop when a wall appears where a door used to be. He invoked the bride debt. "I paid blood silver for her, 4,500 marks to the settlement council for her resettlement bond, a bride price to a clan that no longer exists, and a year's worth of keep before the wedding was even set. That debt doesn't close because she decides to leave." His voice carried the particular polished certainty of a man reciting terms he believed were inarguable, as if a person could be reduced to a ledger entry, as if the language of transaction could be wrapped around a woman's name and made to fit. Legally, she cannot break the bond oath until the debt is settled. "In this hold," Silas said, and his voice had gone to the place it went when he stopped negotiating. Low, flat, the register that 10 months of field command had burned permanent into his vocal cords. "Nobody is bought, and the only bond oath that matters is the one my mother swore when she opened that door 13 years ago. You're standing on the wrong side of it." Aldrich stepped forward anyway, onto the porch he had been told to stay off of, toward a doorway he had been told he would not pass through. That was the mistake, the actual physical forward motion that turned a conversation into a violation, and a violation into something Silas's training did not need permission to answer. He moved before he decided to. Border instinct does not ask for clearance. He had Aldrich's arm behind his back and his chest against the porch railing before the man had finished the step. Not hard enough to injure past what the moment required. Just hard enough that the question of what happened next stopped belonging to Aldrich entirely. The cloak bunched under Silas's grip. Aldrich made a sound, half outrage, half disbelief. The sound of a man who has never once in his life been handled by someone who was not impressed by him. Behind Silas he heard Nara's voice, not trembling, not begging, but steady, clear, and utterly without apology, saying Aldrich's full name into the signal she was sending to Kalev, reading it like a report, like a woman who had finally stopped narrating her own fear and started narrating his consequences instead. Warden Kalev's horse came up the ridge road fast, lantern swinging. He had been close, 2 streets over, the same distance he had been keeping every night since the Ryder sighting without either of them knowing. The oath stone at the gate had not been a gesture. It had been a deployment. It took less than 10 minutes for Aldrich Vane to go from a man knocking on a porch door to a man in irons on the back of a warden's horse, charged with violating a ward seal, trespassing on posted property, and stalking, stacked on top of the 2 violations he had already accumulated since Nara left. Kalev told him, flat and unhurried, that a provincial magistrate tends to lose patience with a man who needs a 4th chance to understand the word no. Nara stood beside Silas on the porch and watched the lantern light disappear down the ridge road. And for the first time since that first candlelit night, the first time since the skinning blade and the half-peeled root apple and a name arriving in a voice he did not recognize, Silas watched her stop checking the door. The weeks that followed moved the way healing does, not in a straight line, but in slow, uneven waves that sometimes washed forward and sometimes pulled back. And the measure of progress was not the absence of pain, but the growing distance between the moments when the pain arrived uninvited. Nara gave her full account at the provincial magistrate's office, sitting across a stone table from a council investigator who listened the way Kalev had listened, without interruption, without the particular, dismissive tilt of a head that says, "But are you sure?" The magistrate's office took the stalking charge alongside the ward seal violations, and the Vane family, it turned out, had considerably less appetite for a public trial than Aldrich did once the settlement's notice board carried his name in a posting that every merchant in 3 provinces could read over their morning tea. He took a plea. Nara did not get an apology, and she told Silas afterward she had stopped needing one somewhere around the 2nd time. A deputy called a violation a misunderstanding. What she got instead was a 5-year final ward seal with iron teeth behind it. Real enforcement, real consequences, the kind of protection that does not depend on a man choosing to be reasonable, but on a system finally choosing to stop asking him to be. And her name backspelled the way she chose to spell it, written in her own hand on a deed stone for a small hold 2 streets over, that she signed with her own blood silver from a beast healing practice in the settlement that hired her the same week she started sleeping through the night again. Silas noticed it in the weeks after the signing. The way you notice weather changing, not all at once, but in the small accumulating evidence of a season turning. Nara's tusks were growing back. Slowly, bone is patient, and what was filed does not return overnight. But the lower canines were lengthening, reclaiming the curve that had been taken from them, pushing past the blunt stumps Aldrich's cosmetic grinder had left behind. When the fires has started, we ask our wife's state, and now I must forgive. The night before was it? We forget, we freak out. However it is crying, there is no sun spread. A knot on earth was founding, sometimes saved. She did not mention it. Neither did Silas. Some restorations do not need narration. They just need to not be interrupted. Some holds get inherited because someone dies and leaves you the deed stone. Others get inherited because someone once opened a door for a stranger and never quite closed it again. And the debt of that kindness ends up passing forward to whoever is left standing in the kitchen when the fire needs rebuilding. Silas used to think he had come home that year to grieve his mother and settle an estate. It took him weeks to understand that he had actually come home to finish something. Silas Ashward started 13 years before he even knew there was anything left unfinished. 10 weeks later, on a morning with actual sunlight coming through the kitchen window instead of a candle, Silas found Nara exactly where he had found her the first night. Same chair, same table, a blade in her hand. Except this time, she was slicing winter apples for a pie, humming something under her breath he did not recognize. And the candle on the table was lit, not out of necessity, but out of habit, the small amber flame sitting beside the daylight like a memory keeping company with the present. She looked up when the floorboard creaked under his boots, the way she still did, old instincts taking their time to unlearn themselves. But her shoulders did not climb, her jaw did not angle away from the light, her eyes did not check the door. "You're staring. Been a while since I walked into this kitchen and knew exactly who was standing in it." She smiled, the kind that reached all the way up, past the healing tusks, past the jaw that no longer flinched, past every wall she had ever built between herself and the possibility that a room could be safe, and set the blade down without being asked. Later that evening, when Silas came in from walking the boundary, a habit that was becoming less about vigilance and more about the particular quiet pleasure of knowing exactly where his edges were, he found Nara kneeling by the hearth. She had placed something beside the hearthstone, a small, flat river stone, dark and smooth, set flush against the larger hearthstone that Marin had laid decades ago. In Orc tradition, a tradition older than settlements, older than ward seals, older than the border wars that had scattered Nara's clan in the first place, placing your own stone beside a hearth is not a request and not an announcement. It is a simple, irreversible statement. This fire is mine now, too. She had not asked permission. She had not explained. She had simply knelt and placed the stone, and stayed there for a moment with her palm flat against the warm hearthstone beside it, her filed tusks catching the firelight as they grew back, her eyes closed. Silas watched from the doorway and did not interrupt. Some things are not meant to be witnessed so much as allowed to happen without interference, the way a wound-mender learns to step back once the body starts healing on its own. Because the most important part of the work is knowing when to stop doing it. Nara stood, brushed off her knees, and turned to find him there. She did not startle. She just looked at him with the particular, steady calm of a woman who had stopped being afraid of doorways. "Well," she slid a slice of apple across the table toward him. The same gesture, the same table, the same chair. Everything the same, and nothing the same. "You know now, if this story stayed with you, if you felt the weight of a filed tusk growing back, or the warmth of a hearthstone that refused to go cold, or the sound of a name landing in a kitchen that wasn't ready for it, you're not alone. Every week, this channel builds a world like this one from the ground up, and every story hits different because every story is somebody's door. Drop your country in the comments. I want to know where this fire is burning. Which moment landed hardest? The knife in the dark? A mother's warning hidden in a letter? Linen tape on a broken wrist, a bag set down instead of carried through a door, a stone placed beside a hearth without asking. Tell me. I read every single one. Subscribe to the Orcish Saga. Hit the bell. A super thanks keeps the hearth fire lit for the next story. The next saga drops soon, and trust me, you're going to want to be here when the door opens.